There's a phase almost nobody warns you about before you start trading. Not the losing money part. Everyone expects that. This is something else. It's the phase where you start doing everything you were told to do and it still doesn't work, and you begin to quietly wonder if something is wrong with you specifically. Here's the strange part. Every trader who eventually became consistent went through this exact phase. Not most of them, all of them. And most people who quit trading don't quit during the losses at the very beginning, when everything is confusing and new. They quit later, right in the middle, at the exact point where they finally understand the strategy but still can't execute it. That gap between knowing and doing is where trading actually happens, and almost nobody talks about it because it isn't the part that photographs well. So, let's talk about it. There's a shape to how skill develops that shows up again and again in psychology, and it explains this phase almost perfectly. Early researchers studying competence found that people typically move through 4 stages: unaware of what they don't know, painfully aware of what they don't know, consciously able to do it with effort, and finally able to do it without thinking. Trading follows that shape exactly, except the second stage, the painfully aware one, lasts far longer than anyone expects, and it's brutal in a specific way. You already know enough to see every mistake you're making in real time, you just can't stop making them yet. Think about what that actually feels like. You know you shouldn't move your stop loss, you move it anyway. You know you shouldn't size up after a win, you do it anyway. You know the setup isn't confirmed, you take it anyway. Your knowledge has already arrived, your behavior hasn't caught up. And that gap between what you know and what you do is not a strategy problem, it's an emotional one. And it can't be closed by reading one more book or watching one more video. There's a related idea from psychologist David Dunning and his research partner Dunning-Kruger that maps onto this almost perfectly, though most people only remember half of it. Everyone knows the beginning, the burst of false confidence early on, when a small amount of knowledge makes everything feel simple. Fewer people talk about what happens next. Confidence doesn't just level off, it collapses, often dropping lower than when you started as the real complexity of what you're doing becomes visible for the first time. That collapse is not a sign you're getting worse, it's the signature of actually learning something real. The traders who never feel that drop are usually the ones who don't yet understand what they're up against. Picture a trader partway through that drop. Call her Maren. She spent her first few months making money almost by accident, riding a trending market with barely any risk management, convinced she had a talent for this. Then, the market went quiet and choppy, the kind of market that punishes confidence specifically, and every instinct that had worked before started failing. She began taking trades earlier and earlier, trying to force the feeling of being right again. One week, she gave back 2 months of gains in 4 days. She sent a message that read simply, "I think I got lucky before, and I'm not actually good at this." That sentence is the entire painful phase in one line, and it's almost always wrong, not because she was secretly great at it all along, but because ability was never the missing piece. What was missing was the ability to tolerate being wrong without unraveling, and that only gets built by being wrong repeatedly while staying at the table. There's a related finding from psychologist Seligman in research on how people explain setbacks to themselves. He found that people who treat a bad outcome as permanent and personal, "This is just how I am, I'm not cut out for this," tend to give up. People who treat it as temporary and specific, "This trade went badly because of this decision," recover and keep going. The difference isn't talent, it's the story you tell yourself in the 10 seconds after a loss. Maren's sentence, "I'm not actually good at this," was the permanent, personal version. The version that keeps you in the game sounds smaller and less dramatic. That trade was early, and I know exactly why. Here's a second story, a shorter one. A trader named Colton had the opposite problem. He wasn't undisciplined. If anything, he was rigid, journaling every trade, backtesting constantly, doing everything the guides say to do. And still, nothing seemed to change. Week after week looked the same. He described it as spinning his wheels, working hard and staying exactly where he started. What he was actually in was a plateau, and plateaus are where a specific kind of psychological research becomes useful. Psychologist Anders Ericsson, known for his work on how experience actually develops, found that improvement doesn't happen just from repetition. It happens from repetition combined with immediate, specific feedback and a willingness to sit in discomfort on purpose. Most plateaus aren't actually flat. They're periods where real change is happening below the surface, in reaction time, in pattern recognition, in emotional regulation, none of which shows up in your account balance right away. It shows up later, all at once, in a way that can feel sudden even though it was built slowly the entire time. That's roughly what happened to Colton. Nothing changed for 6 weeks. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, he didn't take an early entry that used to be automatic for him. He noticed the urge, watched it pass, and waited for the actual signal. He said it felt almost boring. That boredom was the whole transformation. The version of him that used to click on impulse simply wasn't there anymore, and he barely noticed the moment it left. Why does any of this matter for you, specifically, right now? Because if you're in the middle of this phase, the evidence available to you is misleading. You can see your losses, you can see your mistakes, you cannot see the parts of you that are quietly being rebuilt, because those don't show up on a chart. The discomfort you're feeling isn't proof you're on the wrong path. In the shape of skill development, it's what the correct path is supposed to feel like at this exact stage. This also reframes what the losses are actually for. Most people think the goal of a losing trade is simply not to lose, but a loss handled well is doing something else entirely. It's the specific mechanism by which your reaction to being wrong gets rebuilt. You cannot read your way into staying calm during a drawdown. You can only survive enough drawdowns while staying honest about what happened, until calm becomes the default instead of the exception. There's one more piece worth naming, because it explains why this phase feels so isolating even though it's universal. Almost nobody posts about it. You see the win screenshots, the account growth curves, the finally consistent announcements. You essentially never see the 6 weeks before that post, the ones that looked like nothing was happening at all. That creates a distorted picture where everyone else seems to be moving forward smoothly while you're the only one stuck. You're not comparing your actual progress to their highlight reel. You're comparing your full, unedited experience to their highlight reel, and that comparison will always come out lopsided because it was never a fair one to begin with. So, if today looks like the day everything you've learned still isn't showing up in your results, that isn't evidence you're not built for this. Ability was never really the bottleneck. It's your relationship to being wrong that's still under construction, and that only gets built one uncomfortable trade at a time, not one more piece of information. The traders who make it through aren't the ones who skipped this phase. There isn't a version of this that skips it. They're simply the ones who kept showing up while it was still happening, who treated each bad trade as temporary and specific instead of permanent and personal, and who let the discomfort do the only job discomfort has ever been able to do, which is to change you slowly enough that you don't notice until it's already done. If this is where you are right now, that isn't the sign trading isn't for you. It's the sign that it's working exactly as it's supposed to. The version of you that can hold a losing trade without panicking, that can wait for confirmation without flinching, that can take a bad week and call it a bad week instead of a verdict, that version is already being built. You just haven't met them yet.